He's standing on the side of the bridge. His life is filled with hopelessness. His only goal right now is to take his own life. A policeman approaches. Policeman and him have this discourse together. And the policeman is trying to get him down, preventing him from committing suicide. The policeman says to him, he says, listen, I've got an idea. How about you take 5 minutes, tell me how bad your life is and why you need to take it. And then give me 5 minutes, and then I'll tell you how good life is and why you should keep on living. He had his 5 minutes, the policeman had his 5 minutes, and they both got on the side of the bridge and jumped off together. And we could chuckle at that, but there is a world really, isn't there, filled with hopelessness and despair. And I want you to know this morning, and I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, but the ultimate truth is in the beginning God. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And in verse 14 it says, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. This is the truth. But what's so wonderful about it is the entry, the precious entry. In the Gospel of Luke, the first few verses, it says, so Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. And he went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. It is a precious entry. It's a virgin giving birth. And while they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in clothes and placed him in a manger because there was no room for him in the inn. And people are now approaching because they've got messages in different ways. And a message is given to the shepherds. And the shepherds are coming, and this message is for all. And one of your own shepherds shared this already this morning, but can I read it again? And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. An angel of the Lord approached them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, do not be afraid. I bring you good news of great joy that will be before all the people. Today, in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is Christ the Lord. Back in 1994, 2 Americans were asked, they were invited by the Russian government to come teach morals and ethics. And they wanted it taught to their businessmen, they wanted it taught to policemen and firemen, and there was also a large orphanage. And they told them, listen, you can share it with the perspective of your faith. And it was getting close to Christmas time, and so they shared the story to 100 boys and girls, these orphans, for the first time. And they told the story how they, arrived in Bethlehem and there was no room in the inn, and they went to the manger, and they said the children just sat there spellbound, and so did the staff. Once the story had been completed, Fish, one of the guys, said we gave them an exercise, and so we handed out 3 pieces of cardboard for them to make this kind of makeshift manger, and we gave them each a yellow napkin, and they could, strips and make that straw. And we had torn up this old flannel gown, and gave them each a piece, and they could make a blanket for the baby. And then it finished off with tan flannel, and they could cut out a baby. And Fish says, the children are just going to it now, and he's going through all the tables. And he said, I came to this one table. The guy was finished, Misha, 6 years old, standing beside the table, hands crossed, straight face. I'm done. And he said, I looked at Misha's manger, and it had 2 babies in it. And so he said, Misha, the story you heard, and Misha just spouted it off. Just verbatim, until he got to Mary placing the baby in the manger. And then he began to ad lib. And I quote, and when Mary laid, quoting Misha, and when Mary laid the baby in the manger, Jesus looked at me and asked me if I had a place to stay. I told him I have no mama and no papa. And so I don't have a place to stay. And then Jesus told me that I could stay with him. But I told him I couldn't because I didn't have a gift to give him like everybody else did. But I wanted to stay with Jesus so much, so I thought up what I could give him. Maybe I could use some sort of gift. And the only thing that I could think of was this, to give myself. So I asked Jesus, if I keep you warm, will that be a good enough gift? If you keep me warm, Jesus says, that will be the best gift in the world that I could receive. And so I got into the manger, and then Jesus looked at me and told me that I could stay with him always. And Fish says that when this boy had finished telling the story, that his eyes were filled to the brim with tears, because he had found in Jesus someone that would not abandon him, and someone that would not abuse him, and God would be with him always. Man tries so hard to mend man, and with honest motives and honest desires. And yet I'm telling you, and these people in this orphanage, I'm doing so much good, but I'm telling you, we have a God that created us for relationship. And the chief relationship is to have a relationship with him. He is the answer. People are communicating all kinds of ways today. It just blows me away. Look at our cell phone. It was just to make a call. And now today I've been bombarded with pictures of grandchildren. That's wonderful. We give photos, we send photos, we get email, we text, we have GPS, we play music. We're communicating and the young people can have these multiple conversations in that amazing cryptic style at a ferocious pace. But this morning, when we have in our FaceTime together, we leave all that behind. We remember the incarnation, a God who in dramatic ways demonstrates his desire to have a relationship with us. And how do we know? Because it's not just talk. He makes himself accessible, reachable, attainable. It's good news of love and hope that is delivered personally. Emmanuel, God with us. Yes, there is eternity. But right now in our lives, we live in this compartment called time. And I want you to know that God is with you and he is with me. Jesus promises us that. This entry promises us this. And when the cancer biopsy comes back positive, and when the spouse of 15 years stomps out the door, and when the bottle is calling the shots, and when the desire for a companionship is drained through a lonely holiday season, it's Emmanuel, God with us. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, he says, I will never let you down. I'll never walk off and leave you. How could I not, in my thoughts here, as we make a transition, by not reading Helen Mollicote? I was regretting the past and fearing the future. Suddenly my Lord was speaking. My name is I Am. He paused. I waited. He continued. When you live in the past with its mistakes and regrets, it's hard. I am not there. My name is not I was. When you live in the future with its problems and fears, it's hard. I'm not there. My name is not I will be. When you live in this moment, it is not hard. I am here. My name is I Am. Emmanuel, God with us. In traveling over this morning, my oldest grandson said, Granddaddy, my heart was filled with joy when I was baptized. And my father said, Tristan, there's only one thing you have to do in life, and that's keep your eyes on Jesus. Wonderful entry, telling you he has an awesome exit strategy. A baby does all this? No. The baby grows up and he has purpose and ministry. That's the other part of the story.
It's an incredible story that is so unbelievable that when I first heard it, I wasn't sure if it really occurred. And if it did, then I said, wow, what wonderful, wonderful news. I first heard it and had to check it out. And then after it was reported in outlets from USA Today to LA Times to CNN to Fox News, and then after Googling it and seeing pictures about it, it's true. Analia Boder was 26 weeks pregnant when she gave birth prematurely to her fifth child in Argentina's northern Chaco province back on April the 3rd of this year. Immediately, she was given the gut-wrenching and knee-buckling news that her child was stillborn. And within 20 minutes of that news, they were given the baby's birth certificate. All of our hearts break when we hear of people who have to go through that kind of heartache. And I am convinced that only those who have been in their shoes can truly comprehend. And yet all of us grieve and pray for people in that situation. Because she was so understandably distraught immediately after her delivery, she didn't get to tell her precious unborn child goodbye. So a few hours after she left recovery, she insisted on seeing her stillborn child again. The hospital agreed. So she and her husband were led to a refrigerated morgue. And with her heart breaking, she and her husband opened the tiny coffin that had been nailed shut in that refrigerated morgue. I want you to listen in her own words to what she said. I moved the covering aside and saw the tiny hand with all 5 fingers. I touched her hand and then uncovered her face. That's when I heard a tiny little cry. I told myself I wasn't imagining it. Then I stepped back and I saw her waking up. It was as if she was saying, "Mama, you came for me." I fell to my knees. My husband didn't know what to do. We started crying and then laughing and crying and laughing. We must have seemed crazy. The baby was then rushed to the neonatal intensive care unit, where that less than 2-pound precious baby girl struggled, but fought courageously for life, and she survived. And guess what they named her? My Spanish is not well. I'll give you the English translation. How about that? It's translated into English, our miracle light. Our miracle light. To her family, she was, wasn't she? And she will be to everyone who hears her story. That almost too good to be true story reminds me of the miracle light that Brother Dorian just shared with us in a powerful way, about the miracle light of the light of the world, who stepped down from darkness, or stepped down into darkness, and came to open our eyes and let us see. If I were asked to summarize in one sentence the story of God that we've been studying for 52 weeks this year, I'd do it this way. We were dead, but God came for us. That's the story that all the Old Testament writers were pointing their people to. That's the story that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all in their unique ways, told us about. It's the story, it's the cosmic story that Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians 4 and 5 that gives us hope and motivates us not to give up or to lose heart. Even though we may be pressed hard on every side, because God came for us, we're not crushed. And even though we are perplexed, because God came for us, we're not in despair. And even though we're persecuted, because God came for us, we're not abandoned, even if we are struck down. Because God came for us, we are not destroyed. Why do we as Christians think that way? It's because we know, as 2 Corinthians 5 says, that when we were dead, God came for us. And His love compels us to no longer, 2 Corinthians 5:16 says, look at the world from a worldly point of view. Verse 17 of that same chapter says that we were dead, but now in Christ we are a new creation, and therefore we have a message of hope and a ministry of reconciliation to live out and to share for a hurting and often hopeless world. Peter put it this way in 1 Peter 1, He, that's Jesus, was chosen before the creation of the world, but was revealed in these last times for your sake. Through Him you believe in God, who raised Him from the dead and glorified Him, so that your faith and hope are where? In God. Ever since I heard the story of that little girl, I can't get her off of my mind. Even though her parents are going to tell her her story all of her life, how will she truly ever comprehend how blessed she is or what happened to her? And it's the same thing about us. Even though we've heard the story of Jesus all of our life, and even though our study through the Bible this year, hopefully, Lord willing, has changed us, and changed how we view God, and changed how we see the world, and how we see what's going on in the world. How do we ever really comprehend the fact that we were dead in our trespasses and sin, but God came for us? Now here's the reality of the world that we live in. Because God came for us, that doesn't mean that horrible events will no longer occur, nor does it mean that we'll never have any more heartache and pain and grief. I get an email every Monday, a devotional. Would you listen to the one that our brother wrote this last Monday after what happened in Connecticut? The horrible event in Newtown, Connecticut, that has raised so much outrage in what we call unthinkable is unthinkable. Just like Stalin's gulags, the Holocaust, Mao's purges, Rwandan massacres, Columbine, the 9/11 attacks, Darfur, and the list is short but comprehensive. Conceived as fictions, they would be bad enough. Lived as experiences in the lives of people, they are far worse. The fact that these have been so many does nothing to make any one of them less appalling. The time it takes me to recall an event is the same time necessary to bring a flood of pain into my heart. And today, the grief is almost suffocating me. The president speaks to name what has happened, only to choke up and tear. Others of us have done the same. But who could possibly feel the grief of the mother and the father of those 20 boys and girls except those who have lost children And to the parents of those children who escaped, feel an awkward joy today. This is the Christmas season. It's a time for lights and bells, smiles and laughter. It's about children squealing and squirming. It's not supposed to be about children dying, but wait. The story of Jesus is a story that's not only about the Magi and the shepherds and angels, but Herod as well. Isn't that true? Matthew's gospel tells us about the infants that Herod had murdered in Bethlehem. It quotes the prophet Jeremiah saying, "A cry was heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning. Rachel weeps for her children, refusing to be comforted." So on this Christmas, remember that all of this was going on in God's world, a world that He created to be filled with love and compassion and life. The manger in Bethlehem had the shadow of a cross over it already. And Newtown reminds us that violence and agony and hurt and pain and death threaten us all. But Newtown and Bethlehem both remind us of our need for God and our need for each other. You see, because God came for us, there is hope for the hurting and for the hopeless. 2 weeks ago on Sunday afternoon, the local day-by-day support group had their annual candlelight vigil here. The rock was filled with people looking for comfort and peace and help and hope and support. And people today are looking for that. Friends in Calhoun and other friends in Augusta, Georgia. And friends right here among us. Some on this day came to honor the life of a precious loved one, and others, like myself in summer, having never been in the shoes that many of our friends have been in, we came 2 weeks ago, wanting to help our friends carry their load and silently lift up and pray for others whom we love who couldn't be here, knowing that the prayers of many of you have been what sustained us for the past few months. One old song makes chill bumps pop out all over my body every time that I think about it or hear it played. It goes like this: carry your candle, run to the darkness, seek out the hopeless, confused and torn, hold up your candle for all to see. Take your candle and go light the world. Go take your candle and light your world. And that's exactly what Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount called us to do. And that's what Jesus did. Light of the world, you step down into the darkness. Open our eyes and let us see the beauty that made this heart adore you, a hope of a life filled with you. So here I am to worship. Here I am to bow down. Here I am to say that you are my God. And so it is because we were dead and God came for us that we then can sing with confidence, with tears in some of our eyes, with joy in the hearts of others. We can sing with confidence the powerful words in many of our songs, some that we quoted this morning, another that we'll quote tonight: blessed be your name in a land that's plentiful, when the streams of abundance flow. Blessed be your name, but blessed be your name when I'm found in a desert place, though I walk in the wilderness. Blessed be your name. We're about to stand and sing with confidence another hope-filled song, but before we do, I want to tell you the story behind it, and I hope that it'll bring hope to you this Christmas season, and I hope that it'll bring hope to you forever, and that you will never forget this story. On Christmas Eve in 1885, Eugene Monroe Bartlett was born in the Show Me state of Missouri. His parents moved his family to Arkansas, where he grew up and where he matured both physically and spiritually. As he grew, Eugene Bartlett developed a love for music, and he became a sought-after music teacher. And after he married and had children, then he began to make a living traveling across the South, holding singing schools. Do some of you remember those days? One of Bartlett's musical gifts was writing lyrics to songs. And he wrote both the lyrics and the music, which is unusual. He wrote both secular and spiritual songs. In fact, he wrote a country song entitled "Take an Old Cold Tater and Wait," and as odd as it sounds, it became a country music hit for little Jimmy Dickens. I don't think I'd buy it, I'm going to tell you. But a lot of people did. But he is not known so much for his secular songs as he is for his spiritual one, the one we're going to stand and sing in just a moment. For you see, Bartlett was 54 years old when he suffered a massive stroke. It left him incapacitated and unable to speak. He spent the rest of his life bedridden. And although he was a broken man physically, he was far from broken spiritually or emotionally. He was determined to use whatever creative abilities that he still had in his keen brain for God's glory, to bless other people and give them hope. And so day after day, as he laid silently in his bed, he thought, and he thought, and he thought. And instead of being bitter, he decided to be a blessing to those who would come to see him. He spent the last month of his life here on earth writing every word and every note to the song we're about to stand and sing. Even though, again, he could not speak or walk, he wanted to demonstrate his faith, that his faith would not crack under the face of suffering. And so, in a declaration of his faith, both in the incarnation and in the resurrection, we're going to stand, and as a declaration of what we believe and an encouragement to ourselves and to the fellow strugglers sitting around us, we're going to sing this song that he wrote both the words and the melody to. I heard an old story of how a Savior came in glory, how he gave his life on Calvary to save a wretch like me. I heard about his groanings, but also of his precious blood atoning. Then I repented of my sins, and I won the victory. He sought me, and he bought me when I was dead with his redeeming blood. He loved me ere I knew him, before I ever knew him. And all my love is what? Due him. He plunged me to victory beneath that crimson flood. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. If you need the one who came and lived and died for you when you were dead so that you could live, we encourage you to come as together we stand and sing.